So, I would like to welcome everybody again to our panel discussion. And today we're studying Daniel 2, the next chapter. If you haven't seen Daniel 1, I really recommend it. It was a hot discussion. Anyway, this is Daniel 2, and this is really when you can see that prophecy plus history, that equals no fear at all. That's amazing. But before we dig into the Word of God, let's pray together. Dear Father, I want to thank you so much for giving us brains that we can think and eyes that we can read. Father, thank you for giving us the book of Daniel, and pray that your Holy Spirit will be with us now when we're discussing. So it's not our thoughts, it's your thoughts in us, and that we share it, it can go to people and touch their hearts. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Now, in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was so troubled that his sleep left him. Then the king gave the command to call the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king. And the king said to them, I have had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to know the dream. Then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic. O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will give the interpretation.
So here comes a really cool point, actually. In here in verse 2, in the middle of verse 4, not verse 2, in verse 4, when they say that they spoke in Aramaic, this is when the language changes. Before it was in Hebrew, it was for the Jews, and they talk about not unclean meat and all of that. Yeah. But now it begins in Aramaic, and that meaning that, and it continues being in Aramaic until chapter 7, and whole through chapter 7, being that those chapters are mainly there for spreading God and His truths.
Yeah, and a big thing that we're going to be seeing throughout this chapter is actually inclusivity, and it's going to pop up in really cool ways. So,
you know, another thing too to make note is the fact that this has actually been a stumbling block for a lot of people about the authenticity of Daniel, because they find the manuscripts in the beginning written in Hebrew, and then in the middle Aramaic, and then Hebrew. So they're like, oh no, Daniel didn't write this, other people wrote it. But in truth, when you study it, it's actually because God has a very specific reason for this. And that's because this is a message not just for the people of Israel and Judah, but the people of the world. Yeah. And you're going to see that when we keep reading. So verse 5, the king answered and said to the Chaldeans, my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me and its interpretation, you shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made an ash heap. So clearly, Assyria wasn't the only violent empire. However, if you tell the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts, rewards, and great honor. Therefore, tell me the dream and its interpretation. Okay. They answered again and said, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will give its interpretation. The king answered and said, I know for certain that you would gain time, because you see that my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me, there's only one decree for you. For you have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the time has changed. Therefore, tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can give me its interpretation. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, there is not a man on earth who can tell the king's matter. Therefore, no king, lord, or ruler has ever asked such things of any magician, astrologer, or Chaldean. It is a difficult thing that the king requests, and there is no other who can tell it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh.
So basically a big point here is a lot of theologians think that, you know, in their way of thinking, there are two basically levels of gods. So like the big gods up there, and then more lower mediatorial gods. And these wise men were supposed to be able to communicate with both types. And so by saying, oh, like, nobody can tell it to the king except the gods whose dwelling is not with flesh, they're basically saying, sorry, we can't contact them right now. And basically they're outing themselves, like they can't do what their whole job was.
So you're saying basically they're calling themselves liars at this point?
Yeah, basically. Like, it's one thing to be able to make up dreams, but the king is really testing them, because if their gig is real, then they should be able to say what the dream is, besides just being able to say the meaning of it.
Because their only job was to do stuff like this, communicate with God, and that's why He paid them to interpret His dream and now tell His dream too. And I think it's really interesting that we read in chapter 6, verse 6, not chapter, we're in chapter 2 still, that Nebuchadnezzar is black and white. I mean, either I will kill you and chop you to pieces, and I read what that meant, it's very brutal, or I will give you gifts and rewards and everything. Like, it's never, he's always hot or cold, he's never lukewarm.
No.
That's pretty funny.
Another thing when it comes to dreams, because this is going to be a big point, is that basically they view dreams as a way that the gods communicated with them. And, we've been talking about how God is inclusive and how God is trying to reach every single group of people at all times. And we see this in Nebuchadnezzar getting a dream that God doesn't just care about the Jewish nation, but he cares just as much as the Babylonians. And I think that, usually we think, oh, like, wow, how great, like God is contacting the Babylonians, which he has never done before. But in reality, like we see this because Daniel's there seeing it and writing about it. Like these types of things are happening all over the world at all times. And so God is using dreams because that's the way he's able to reach these people. Yeah.
And if we take note of today and times today, we know that there people in like the Middle East are still having dreams.
Yeah.
And they know about this white robed person, and then they know about a white person coming to give them the truth, and there's just different dreams being displayed all the time, just maybe not in Western culture.
Yeah.
And many may wonder why not in Western culture, and I think it's because we have so much science about dreams. Like we try to define it and crumb it down like what it really is, but especially here in Babylon, like dreams were something from God. It was something special, and that's where God could meet them because they know God knew that they thought it was something special.
And that's where God longs to do with us, is meet us where we are at and speak to us in the language that we understand. He's like, Rafael, I want you to understand me, so I'm going to meet you where you are and relate to you where you are. Verse 12, for this reason the king was angry and very furious and gave the command to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree went out and they began killing the wise men, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them.
I just want to add a point here that I think is really cool, that Daniel was not a part of the magicians or astrologers or Chaldeans. Because I had this thought, well, was Daniel doing like dark magic and stuff like that? But wise men meant like all kind of people who helped the king think. And he was maybe something more in science, math, or maybe language, something like that. He was not a magician. Because you see that they sought out to kill Daniel, and he was not among them, the magicians, and I just think that's pretty cool.
Then with counsel and wisdom, Daniel answered Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree from the king so urgent? Then Arioch made the decision known to Daniel. So Daniel went in and asked the king to give him time, that he might tell the king the interpretation.
I think one big point from this too is that, Arioch is, so the captain of the king's guard, he's going out to go kill the wise men. But then he takes time to stop and answer Daniel's questions. And so I think, this is just speculation, but I think that this really shows that Arioch and Daniel must have had some sort of connection or relationship before. Like, if he was just some random Joe Schmo, like, off with his head, but because this is Daniel, like, he's going to give him more time and explain things before he actually does the killing.
Yeah, in historical context, you don't usually see that, like a reasoning back and forth. It's just, this is the decree and we carry it out. So there has to be some respect for Daniel as a man and a person to go to that level to be like, well, I'll explain it. And another thing, too, is that Daniel went in to the king. He took a risk. And I think that's a good application for us, because sometimes we believe, oh, it's just safer if I do nothing. But the truth was, Daniel's options were do something and take a risk, or do nothing and be killed. And so often I think we don't really apply that to our personal lives, and the fact that we're like, oh, it's just easier if I don't say anything. I don't want to offend anybody, or I don't want to step on toes. But sometimes in the very act of not doing something, we are agreeing with it. We are taking part of it. And so not being afraid to stand up is important.
I think a really cool point here is that he asked for more time from Nebuchadnezzar, which he got. But when Nebuchadnezzar were talking with the magicians and astrologers, they didn't get time. He said, oh, I see that you're trying to get more time, but no, I will kill you. But when Daniel comes and asks, hey, can I get more time to do this? He said yes, and maybe you wonder why. It could be because the magicians and astrologers and Chaldeans, they immediately said, well, that's impossible for us. Like, no king has ever asked that, but Daniel said, well, I can do it.
Yeah, he spoke hope. Even maybe he spoke faith right away, off to the bat. Give me time, I will figure this out. Right away he spoke words of faith, which is a great lesson to us as well, is just learning to speak words of faith, not always needing the proof. Verse 17, then Daniel went to his house and made the decision known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, that they might seek mercies from God, the God of heaven, concerning this secret, so that Daniel and his companions might not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. So Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, "Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. And he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and secret things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank you and praise you, O God of my fathers. You have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we have asked of you. For you have made known to us the king's demand." What a beautiful prayer. I think there's a lot of promise in that for us, and the fact that, like, we all have deep and dark secret things that we don't understand why this happened. And I think God longs to reveal to us the secrets and the mysteries of this world, why the troubles, why the heartache, and light dwells with him. There's no darkness. And if you think about it, truth is exposed in the light, sin hides in the darkness. You know, so there's so much beautiful promises in this prayer.
Oh, also another thing in verse 19, it says the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. And I was reading in Job, and it says like night vision is basically a dream. And so Daniel had to have been able to fall asleep. Like he must have had that calm, like knowing that God's got his back, to be able to fall asleep so that he's able to have this dream from God. Like that shows a massive amount of faith. Like I know before tests, like I get stressed and then I can't fall asleep. But I mean, this is gonna be the biggest test of Daniel's life, and he's just calm and he's able to trust God in that. And I also think it's really cool. We're gonna see hints and echoes from this prayer throughout the rest of the chapter. So,
you know, your point reminds me of that verse, "Come to me, all you who are labor and heavy laden, I will give you rest."
Yeah.
And I think too often as Christians we forget that a life with Christ is a life of restfulness. Doesn't mean you always get everything, but there's this calm peace and assurance. And Daniel obviously believed it. He went to sleep. I don't know about you, but there's many other minor things besides my life on the line that I can't sleep about that night. So
I think an amazing thing is that he thanked God as soon as he got it, and he was so very confident that compared to the magicians and Chaldeans before that were afraid. They were afraid of Nebuchadnezzar and what he would do, and this really shows that when you know prophecy, there is no fear.
Amen.
Oh, that's a good, I don't know, series. I don't know. That's just me.
Verse 24, "Therefore Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus to him, 'Do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me before the king, and I will tell the king the interpretation.' Then Arioch quickly brought Daniel before the king, and thus said to him, 'I have found a man of the captives of Judah, who will make known to the king the interpretation.' The king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, 'Are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretations?' Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, 'The secret which the king has demanded, the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, and the soothsayers cannot declare to the king. But there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets and has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head upon your bed were these.'"
Oh, there's so many good points in here. You actually brought up earlier from verse 27 that I thought was super impactful, so I'm going to steal it now. But basically, Daniel's numbering himself with this group that can explain things. He says that the wise men, so he's a wise man, the astrologers, magicians, and soothsayers cannot declare the king. He's saying, like, I can't tell you. Like, he's from the get-go, he's telling him that it's not him who's going to be able to interpret the dream to him.
I think you see Daniel's selfless character a lot, because if you go back to the prayer in verse 23, he recognizes, you have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we have asked of you. Right away, he acknowledges that he's part of a community, that his friends and him have been praying. And you'll see that compared to like Arioch, who says, "I have found a man of the captives of Judah." Daniel went to Arioch and said, "Hey, I can tell you." And so it's just interesting how often I think Daniel is a very selfless person, and also he acknowledges the fact that it was a community, and it was not just him that was able to spend that time with God.
And also very, very cool when he came in there, he said, "Do not destroy the wise men." Like, don't destroy anyone, even though they were maybe doing dark magic and like telling the future and lying to people. He said, don't destroy them. And he kind of had faith in them the same way God has faith in us.
Another example of God not being an exclusive God but an inclusive, Because Daniel right away, I mean, he could have been like, oh, perfect time to get rid of some
Yeah.
nuisances. And so people who are really speaking false things, I think, we often want to do that. Like, oh,
Yeah.
don't include those people in our church, or don't include those people in this group, because they're just spreading lies. But the truth is, these men were literally spreading lies, and Daniel was like, wait, keep them alive.
Yeah.
Because I want to reach their hearts.
Yeah. Okay. So a big theme, actually, really cool connection is a lot of the themes in the Bible is that a lot of people are spared because of one righteous person. And so in Matthew, Jesus says Christians, or we're supposed to be the salt of the earth. And I always thought, oh yeah, we're supposed to make things taste good. We're salt. But I realized, salt was used to preserve things. Like it wasn't just used to make your food taste good. It was used to preserve things. And so being the salt of the earth means that you preserve other people.
Yeah.
And so that's shown right here about him trying to defend people who wouldn't have defended him. He's preserving other people because he was righteous.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Also, it shows you right now what's available to each one of us.
Yeah.
We represent a big community that if we are righteous, we're able to bring many before the Lord. So do not be discouraged.
Yeah.
Keep representing your people. All right. We're on verse 29, correct?
Yeah.
As for you, O king, thoughts came to your mind while on your bed about what would come to pass after this. And he who reveals secrets has made known to you what will be. But as for me, this secret has not been revealed to me, because I have more wisdom than anyone living, but for our sakes, who make known the interpretation to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your heart. You, O king, were watching, and behold, the great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome.
Okay, I think we're going to take a quick pause right here because we just kind of need to set up the framework for what we're going to be going over. And so basically what we're going over now is going to be the prophecy itself that we find in Daniel 2. We're actually not going to dive super in depth about what exactly it means because it's going to be expanded on later in Daniel 7 and 8. So you might not get as much as you want out of this conversation about the prophecy in specific, but I guarantee you it's going to be expanded on a lot later on.
Okay, here we go. History plus prophecy. Let's see how this works out. Verse 32. This image head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You watched while the stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found. And the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This is the dream. Now we will tell you the interpretation of it before the king. You, O king, are a king of kings. For the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the field and the birds of the heaven, he has given them into your hand, and has made you ruler over them all. You are this head of gold.
So basically he's saying that this first head of gold is Babylon, and that's what it represents. Also, just a quick side note. Basically, I see a really cool connection with Daniel's prayer in verse 21 and this verse. So in verse 21 it says, and he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. And then you see Daniel's not afraid to tell the king what he said in his prayer. Like he's not afraid to live out what his faith is. Because he says, oh, you, O king, are a king of kings. For the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And he says, he has given them into your hand and has made you ruler over them all. You are this head of gold. So basically he's saying, oh, it's not your own power. It's not your father's power. It's not your god Marduk's power. It's God's power. And so he's not afraid to tell Nebuchadnezzar like what the truth is. And he's not just keeping what he said in his prayers and praises to himself. Like he's willing to share that with others. So.
Yeah, and also I think one thing that's different too that we could apply to our lives is the fact that he believed his prayer. I think too often we leave things like, this is my prayer life, and then we totally forget as we live through our days or our months roll on that, wait a second, I prayed it, and if you pray it, then God makes it come true. Like if you declare, then live out that you claim the promises. If you say, God, I believe that you forgive me, then live as if you've been forgived. If you say, God, give me rest, then live as if he's given you the promise of rest. And I think that's one thing that's really beautiful, is to actually say, no, I'm going to believe and live out as if those promises are true. All right, so we had the head of gold, which is Babylon. But after you shall arise another kingdom, and inferior to yours, then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth.
And here they just talk about two kingdoms coming now, and the first kingdom that is inferior to you is Medo-Persia. So Babylon was conquered like 539 by Medo-Persia, and that's pretty cool. And that the chest and everything is silver. And I was always willing, because I've seen pictures of this. Of what does that mean? Because I've seen pictures, and the statue was like this. And I don't know, why is the arms like this all the time? I didn't read the Bible when I was little, but I was wondering, and then because it's Media Persia together as one nation, and
cool.
even though if the arms wasn't together in the dream, it's still connected.
Yeah.
The arms are connected in your chest because it's one nation.
Yeah.
And also that kingdom will be inferior to yours. You can see through the statue, it's like gold, silver, bronze, iron, and then iron and clay. Like it's always going inferior and inferior, like worse metals. But also the kingdom in itself will be more inferior to the other one.
Yeah. Like the prosperity or quality of living for all of the citizens decrease.
Yeah.
And Babylon is literally known as the Golden City.
Yeah.
I mean, gold was everywhere in Babylon.
yeah.
So any historicist would recognize that Babylon would be represented by gold.
Yeah.
Then you have Media Persia by silver. Then you have this third kingdom of bronze, which is Greece, and they used brass and everything that they made, especially in their army.
Yeah.
So their helmets, their battle axes, their shields, they're all made of brass. So it isn't that uncommon either to be like, oh yes, Greece is bronze.
Yeah. And I mean, we're going to hit these points as well in even greater detail in Daniel 7. So even if we're kind of like, oh, not sure, that's a bit of a stretch, which I don't even think it's a bit of a stretch, but even if it is, it seems like a cause for doubt, we're going to be able to hit it later on, even more detail. Oh, also a point about in verse 39, it says, this kingdom shall rule over all the earth. That always used to bother me when I read it, because it's like, well, it was only in the Middle East, and it didn't actually, like, North America, South America,
China.
But basically, they were talking about like the known world for that area. Like we have maps, and we have Google, and we have international air travel, but back then they had legs and horses. So there's only so far you could go in your life. And I think it's also another thing to keep in mind is this is language that the kings are already using. I'm pretty sure Cyrus said that he was the king of the whole world, and obviously he hadn't gotten to all the continents. Kings would regularly say that they ruled over their whole earth, and that their kingdoms were so much above all the other kingdoms that like their rule and their authority was over the entire earth. And so that always used to bother me, but no longer does, because I realize it's definitely a language thing of that time, and so we can't use our modern day understanding of the whole earth in that context.
And if we understand this was written in Aramaic, trying to reach those people in that time, they would be very like, oh yes, over all the earth. This is not unusual. Verse 40. And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything, and like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others. So this kingdom is?
So the next kingdom that conquered Greece then was Rome.
Yeah.
As just order and history, and it's really similar to Rome too. Like the iron, that's what they used when they were fighting all the time, and they were really going around and conquering and crushing. That's how they did stuff. That's how they thought that we're better. We're just crushing you. So this kingdom is Rome.
Yes. And they were known to rule with an iron fist.
Yeah.
That's a name for them. Verse 41, whereas you saw the feet and toes partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, yet the strength of the iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile.
Yeah. Oh, should we just finish verse 43?
Yeah, as you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay.
Yeah, so basically what's happening here is after Rome, it's going to break into different parts. And Rome, basically, it fell apart on its own. And then it was also overtaken by a lot of different tribes. And there's just all these different mixing that happened. And you see that these countries never actually got back together again. And there's not been a single power like there was in those times, that has been able to unite all of Europe or the Middle East, like Rome and Greece and Medo-Persia and Babylon did. So
a really cool thing actually with this is that the feet had 10 toes, right?
Yeah.
And it was 10 tribes that came and took over Rome when it scattered, right?
Yeah.
Which is, I'm going to take a piece here and piece here, and they're like, or 10, like your feet have 10 toes.
Yeah.
Another thing too is the fact that it says they will mingle with the seeds of men. Many marriages have tried to unite countries. You know, many European alliances. Oh, if I'll marry the prince from this European country and the princess over here, then finally our countries will work together. And try after try, it just never worked.
Yeah.
And what's really amazing about this dream is it is so historically accurate.
Yeah.
And it has been used to prove the authenticity of the Bible, that you can trust the Bible. And I know of a story of a military person during World War II who showed his general, he's like, if you know, can we talk for real? And I'll show you in the Bible that Hitler will never be able to take over all of Europe, because it's been predicted. Even though it looked like Hitler could do it, it did for a time, and he wasn't, because there will never be a time that all of Europe will be able to unite. And I'm sure you can imagine now in times like these, you can't imagine Europe and Middle East ever uniting. All right, verse 44, sorry. And in the days of these kings, that God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Inasmuch as you saw that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it broke in pieces, the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation is sure.
So basically what it's saying here is that after this time period, or during this time period of all these different nations and kings not being able to mix together, which is basically our modern day, that God is going to come set up his kingdom. And there's also really cool symbolism in the stone cut out without hands. It means like this new kingdom that's going to happen without human intervention. There's going to be divine intervention.
And I think a really cool thing is that when the stone comes and breaks the statue, it's not only the feet, it's not the current time that becomes dust, it's the entire thing. The entire system that we have of ruling everything. God would just crush that and say, this is how we rule. It's not a metal, it's a rock.
And once again, Daniel ends with faith. I think there's so much power in learning how to speak faith. You know, life is hard, life is confusing. There are big areas of darkness and confusion and secrets and why, but when you find something, cling to it. And he says over and over, he speaks words of faith. The dream is certain and its interpretation is sure. No doubt. After he says it, he doesn't be like, all right, king, was I right? Did I get it close? Is there a couple things that were missing? No, he's like, right away, the dream is certain and its interpretation is sure. I think too often Satan doesn't get us in like the big or little things. It's just in that like uncertainty, like, oh, are you really leading me this way? Do you really care if I do this or do not? Like, let's live with a little bit more sureness. Like, God is with me. God will be with me. Christ always was, is, and will be by our side. You know, like we always live with question marks, and it's exhausting to live with question marks. But I think the more we think faith, speak faith, we will actually live as if we do believe our faith. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face, prostrate before Daniel, and commanded that they should present an offering and incense to him. The king answered Daniel and said, truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, since you could reveal this secret. Then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts, and he made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and chief administrator over all the wise men of Babylon. Also Daniel petitioned the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon, but Daniel sat in the gate of the king.
I think it's just so cool seeing that, you know, Daniel didn't just want to be the only one who's glorified. He also remembered his friends who had been praying with him, and he made sure that they also were able to benefit from this honor that the king gave him.
And a pretty cool thing also before that is that Nebuchadnezzar called God the revealer of secrets. And so did Daniel before revealer of secrets. And sometimes it feels like things are just so foggy, we don't see the future, but God shows us the future. He did right here. and He will in the future.
Yes, and in Amos it says God does nothing without revealing first to His prophets. He
Yeah.
longs to show us things. I think Satan's favorite lie is to say God is too confusing. You can't figure out what He wants for you. You can't figure out how to follow Him. It's just too confusing, and so we just end up in this gray cloud. And that's
Yeah.
exactly, Satan doesn't need us to say no God. He just wants to keep us in this cloud of uncertainty. And so if we can be like, Lord, you are a revealer of secrets. I may not always understand why these things happen to me, but I know you can show me a purpose in this awful thing.
And just going off that, it's just, I think that that almost wraps up the entire thing, because you see that all these terrible things happen to Daniel. But then by the end of chapter 2, they're put in charge of, I don't know, the entire kingdom. And also in verse 49, it says, Daniel sat in the gate of the king. And the gate of the king wasn't just watching people go in and out, but it was basically a courtroom scene. He was involved in legislation, and he was involved in how the court ran. And so you see God just positioned Daniel and his friends throughout, like, even though it seemed like a terrible situation, and it was a terrible situation. They lost their family and they lost everything they knew and held dear. But God was able to put them in certain places so that they'd be able to minister to this whole new people group. And just, I think the fact that God reaches out to Nebuchadnezzar and gives him the dream, it just shows, that God honestly does want to reach every single person at every single time.
Amen.
Yeah.
It's an awesome place to end it. Well,
It's a majority gospel.
Yeah.
And God wants to put in
Majority
as
gospel.
many as possible in His family.
Yeah.
And this is when He reached out to Nebuchadnezzar.
and you can see it once again modeled in Daniel's life, and the fact that he had a community.
Yeah.
He didn't just make a solo stand. And when he did make his stand, he recognized Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and he recognizes them again later when he says, look, if you're going to put me in power, it wasn't just me. And I think each one of us represent many people that have helped us get to the point that we're at now.
Yeah.
And we need to appreciate our community. We need to enlarge our community and realize that our nature of a desire for community, we are made in the image of God. It represents His desire. He wants as many to be in His kingdom, just like we want to reach out to many people.
Yeah.
So we hope that you've enjoyed joining us. We have definitely enjoyed discussing Daniel 2. I think we have learned quite a bit. I know I have. And also, if you have any questions, please feel free to post them at the bottom. And also check out for yourself. Check out these nations. Look up a little history and see what it says. Because as you dig more and more in history, you just find that the prophecy is more and more accurate. God bless and have a good night.
See you later.
See ya.